Saint John Mary Baptist Vianney, the Curé of Ars. Among the interesting, and at first sight surprising, phenomena of our time is the interest shown in and affection expressed for two newly canonized saints by many non-Catholics. Not that non-Catholics are usually unconcerned about sanctity, far from it, but the Protestant tradition tends consciously or unconsciously to view with suspicion or indifference any example of holiness which too obviously is stamped with the hallmark of Rome. But the beauty of holiness will not be gainsaid, and from time to time some more than usually resplendent example forces the admiration of the whole world. Such were the Little Flower and the Holy Curé of Ars. And of these two the popularity of Monsieur Vianney is the more remarkable, because the halo of sentimentality, with which undisciplined devotees or unscrupulous exploiters can so easily surround Sir Therese, is far less easily fitted to his head. His face alone is a difficulty, for little can be done by way of getting superficial appeal out of a man whose exterior appearance is that of a sanctified Voltaire. And the life of a country curé in France is no less, even if no more, unfamiliar to the average Englishman or American than the inside of a Carmelite convent. The world into which Jean-Marie Vianney was born, at Dardilly, near Lyons on May 8, 1786, was not an undisturbed one. When he was 3 the revolution began, and 2 years later Dardilly found itself saddled with a constitutional priest, so the little John and his parents had to hear in secret the mass of any fugitive loyal priest who came to the neighborhood. While the terror was going on, no less at Lyons than at Paris and elsewhere, he was learning to be a herd boy, shepherding the cattle and sheep of Mathieu Vianney's farm in the meadows on either side of the little river Planches. He was a quiet, well-behaved and religious child, who urged his companions to be good and would always rather play at church than at games, though he had skill at quoits, which they played for sous. He made his first communion, in secret, when he was 13, and very shortly after Mass could be said again in public at Dardilly. 5 years later he broached to his father his project of becoming a priest. But the good man was unwilling. He could not afford to educate his son, having already had to provide for other members of the family, and could not spare him from the work of the farm, and it was not till he was 20 that Jean-Marie could get permission to leave home for the neighboring village of Eckeley, where the Abbé Bailly had established a presbytery school. His studies were a source of great trouble to him. He had little natural aptitude, and his only schooling had been a brief period at the village school opened at Dardilly when he was 9. Latin above all he found such difficulty in mastering that for a time he and his teacher were discouraged. In the summer of 1806 he made a pilgrimage on foot, over 60 miles, and begging his food and shelter on the way there, to the shrine of Saint John Francis Regis at La Levesque, to implore God's assistance in this unforeseen obstacle. On his return he found his studies no easier, but the deadly spiritual disease of discouragement was gone, and in the following year he was further strengthened by the sacrament of confirmation, received at the hands of Cardinal Fesch, Archbishop of Lyons. On this occasion he added the name of Baptiste to Jean-Marie. And this grace came at the right moment, for another and very serious trial was at hand. Through his name not having been entered on the roll of exempt ecclesiastical students, Jean-Marie Vianney was conscripted for the army. In vain Monsieur Bailly tried to get the matter put right, in vain Mathieu Vianney tried to get a substitute for his son. He had to report at the depot in Lyons on October 26, 1809. 2 days later he was taken ill and sent to hospital, and his draft for the army in Spain left without him. On January 7, being barely convalescent, he was ordered to report at Roanne for another draft on the morrow, and, having gone into a church to pray, arrived only after it had gone. However, he was given his movement order and set out to catch up the draft at Rhena-Isen, having still no military accoutrements but his knapsack. It carried the saint's halo rather than the marshal's baton. Jean-Marie made but poor progress, and while he was resting at the approach to the mountains of La Forez, a stranger suddenly appeared, picked up the knapsack, and peremptorily ordered him to follow. He was too tired to do aught but obey, and presently found himself in a hut near the remote mountain village of Les Naux. He now learned that the stranger was a deserter from the army, and that many more such were hiding in the woods and hills around. Jean-Marie did not know what to do. He saw at once that his situation was compromising, and after a few days reported himself to the mayor of the commune. Monsieur Fayet was an humane official and a sensible man. He pointed out to Jean-Marie that he was already technically a deserter, and that of two evils the lesser was to remain in refuge where he was, and found him a lodging in the house of his own cousin. His hiding place was in a stable under a hayloft. For 14 months Jean-Marie, known as Jerome Vincent, was at Les Naux, persevering with his Latin, teaching the children of his hosts and working on their farm, and earning their love and respect. Several times he was nearly taken by gendarmes, once feeling the point of a sword between his ribs as it was thrust about in the hay of the loft. In March, 1810, the emperor, on the occasion of his marriage with the Archduchess Marie-Louise, had proclaimed an amnesty for all defaulters, and early in the following year, on his brother volunteering to join up before his time as a substitute, Jean-Marie was able to return home, a free man. In 1811 Jean-Marie received the tonsure and at the end of the following year was sent for a year's philosophy to the Petit Séminaire at Verrières. His career there was anything but distinguished, but he plodded on humbly and doggedly, and in the autumn of 1813 went to the Grand Seminaire of Saint Irenaeus at Lyons. Here all the instruction and studies were in Latin and, although the authorities recognized his quality and made special provision and allowances for him, Jean-Marie made no headway at all. At the end of the first term he left the seminary to be coached privately by Monsieur Bailly at École, and after 3 months presented himself at Saint Irenaeus again for examination. In his excitement he lost his head and broke down. The examiners could not accept him for ordination but recommended him to try another diocese. Monsieur Bailly went off at once to see the Abbé Bochard, one of the examiners, and he agreed to come with the rector of the seminary and interview Vianney privately. After this interview, which was satisfactory, they went to put the case of the most unlearned but the most devout seminarian in Lyons before the vicar general, who was governing the diocese in the archbishop's absence. Monsieur Courbon asked one question: Is Monsieur Vianney good? Has he devotion to Our Lady? Does he know how to say his rosary? He is a model of goodness, was the reply. Very well. Then let him be ordained. The grace of God will do the rest. On July 2, 1814, Jean-Marie Vianney received the minor orders and sub-diaconate from the Bishop of Grenoble, and returned to École to continue his studies with Monsieur Bailly. In June 1815 he received the diaconate, 5 days after the Battle of Waterloo, and on August 12 the priesthood. He said his first Mass the following day, and was appointed curate to Monsieur Bailly, to whose clear-sightedness and perseverance is due, under God, the fact that Saint Jean-Marie Vianney ever attained to the priesthood. The Church wants not only learned priests but, even more, holy ones, the Vicar General of Lyons had said at his ordination, and Monsignor Simon, Bishop of Grenoble, had seen in the Abbé Vianney a good priest. The things that a priest must know he did know, but not necessarily from textbooks. Moral theology, for example. When Monsieur Bochard cross-examined him on difficult cases, his replies were explicit and accurate, for the Abbé Vianney was a saint and he had common sense, and moral casuistry is sanctified common sense. A few months after his appointment to École he received his faculties to hear confessions. His first penitent was his own rector, and very soon the run on his confessional was noticeable. Later on, the hearing of confessions was to take up 3/4 of his time. Quietly, rector and curate began to have a holy competition in austerity, rather after the manner of monks in the Thebaid. The curé denounced his vicaire to the vicar general for exceeding all bounds, while Monsieur Vianney retorted by accusing the rector of excessive mortifications. Monsieur Courbon laughed, and said the people of Eckeley were lucky to have 2 such priests to do penance for them. In 1817, to the infinite sorrow of his pupil, Monsieur Bailly died, and early in the following year the Abbé Vianney was made parish priest of Ars-en-Dames, a remote and neglected place of 230 souls, in every sense of the word, a whole. There has been a good deal of exaggeration of the debased spiritual state of Ars at the time when Monsieur Vianney took it in hand, just as there has been of the ignorance of the good man himself. It seems to have been in just about the same state as most English villages in the second quarter of the 20th century, little definite immorality and malicious wickedness, but even less true religion and love of God. The greatest scandal at Ars was probably the deadly scandal of ordinary life. For the rest, there were several exemplary Christian families, including that of the mayor, and the lady of the manor, Mademoiselle Monsieur A. C. Gamier de Garret's, Mademoiselle d'Ars, was sincerely, if rather fussily, pious. The new curé, he was really at that time only a chaplain to a sort of chapel of ease, not only continued but redoubled his austerities, especially the use of a cruel discipline, and for the first 6 years of his incumbency lived on practically nothing but potatoes, seeking to make of himself a sacrifice for the shortcomings of his feeble flock. The evil spirits of impurity and drunkenness and dishonesty and indifference are not cast out but by prayer and fasting, and if the people of Ars would not pray and fast for themselves, well, then their pastor must do so for them. When he had personally visited every household under his care and provided a regular catechism class for the children, he set to work in earnest to make a real conversion of Ars, by personal intercourse, in the confessional, and by laboriously and carefully prepared sermons which he delivered naturally, but not quietly. The people were too sunk in religious indifference and material preoccupations to be amenable to quietness and moderation. Moreover, in those days Jansenism was still something more than a memory and had left its backwash in the methods and teaching of orthodox but rigorous directors and theologians. Consequently, it is not surprising to find that the curé of Ars was very strict indeed. There were too many taverns in the village, where money was wasted, drunkenness encouraged, evil talk not reprehended. First, the 2 near the church were shut, for lack of enough business, then 2 more, 7 new ones were opened in succession, but each one had to close down. He waged relentless war against blasphemy, profanity, and obscenity, and was not afraid to utter from the pulpit the words and expressions that offended God, so there should be no mistake as to what he was talking about. For 8 years and more he struggled for a proper observance of Sunday, not merely to get everybody to Mass and Vespers, but to abolish work which at harvest and other times was done on Sunday without a shadow of necessity. Above all, he set his face against dancing, maintaining that it was of necessity an occasion of sin to those who took part, and even to those who only looked on. To those who took part in it, whether publicly or privately, he was merciless. They must give it up entirely and keep to their resolution, or absolution was refused them. Monsieur le Curé waged this battle, and the associated engagement of modesty in clothes, for 25 years, but he won in the end. In 1821 the district of Ars was, by the good offices of the Vicomte de Garret's, made into a succursal parish, and in 1823 it was separated from the Archdiocese of Lyons to become part of the revived Diocese of Belley. This was an occasion for slanderous attacks on Monsieur Vianney, whose reforming zeal naturally made enemies for him, and his new bishop, Monseigneur Devy, sent the dean to inquire what it was all about, but the bishop soon learned to have confidence in the curé of Ars and later offered him an important parish elsewhere, which he refused only after a good deal of hesitation. In the meanwhile the reputation of His Holiness and achievements was also becoming known, and he was asked to give several parochial missions, when his confessional was always besieged. In 1824 there was opened at Ars by the enterprise of the curé a free school for girls, run by Catherine Lassagne and Benoit Lardet, two young women of the village whom he had sent away to a convent to be trained. Neighboring parishes took advantage of this, and soon they had 16 free boarders on their hands as well. From this school sprang, some 3 years later, the famous institution of La Providence. Monsieur Vianney enlarged the schoolhouse, the pupils were confined to day girls, and the room thus gained was made into a shelter for orphans and other homeless or deserted children, neither babies on the one hand nor adolescent girls on the other being turned away. Not a halfpenny was accepted from the inmates, even from girls who could pay, and neither Mlle Lassagne, Mlle Lardet, nor any other helper received any salary. It was a charity, run on alms, and its final end the saving of souls. At times there were 60 people thus being provided for, and the curé was hard put to it to support such a family. On one occasion the loft was found full of wheat under circumstances that clearly indicate a miracle, and on another occasion the cook testified to making 10-20 pounds loaves from a few pounds of flour, at the prayer of Monsieur Vianney. Such works as these slowly and surely brought about a change of heart among his parishioners, and visitors noticed and commented on their orderly appearance and good behavior, and it was the personal influence and example of the man himself that moved them in the first place. Our curé is a saint and we must obey him. We are no better than other people, but we live close to a saint. Some of them doubtless never got beyond that, it is the will of God, we must obey him, but that is neither here nor there so long as they persevered in obeying the curé precisely because he was a good man. And he, while his people were slowly and painfully coming back to a Christian life, was being the object of manifestations which would appear to be nothing less than a persecution by the devil himself, as Monsieur Vianney believed them to be. There is in history no other record of seemingly diabolical infestation, so long, so varied, and so cogent. The phenomena ranged from noises and voices to personal violence and the unexplained burning of the saint's bed, and continued intermittently from 1824 for over 30 years, both by day and night, sometimes under conditions in which they were observed by others beside the sufferer. It is not an exaggeration to say he took it as all part of the day's work. "You must get very frightened," the Abbé Taquenier said to him. "One gets used to everything, my friend," was the reply. "The Grappin and I are almost comrades." Not only was the curé of Ars subjected to supernatural persecution, but he also suffered from attacks which, were it not for the fallen state of human nature, would be labeled unnatural. Some of the less worthy and less discerning among his brother priests, remembering only his lack of education and formal training, listening perhaps to idle gossip, certainly unable to recognize sanctity when they saw it, criticized his ill-judged zeal, his ambition, his presumption. He was even a quack and an impostor. "Poor little curé of Ars," he commented, "what don't they make him do and say? They are preaching on him now and no longer on the gospel." But they did not stop at verbal criticism and sacristy tittle-tattle. They delayed him to the Bishop of Belley. The curé refused to take any action, nor after inquiry did Monseigneur Devy, but having heard a priest apply the adjective mad to Monsieur Vianney, he referred to it before his clergy assembled at their annual retreat and added, "Gentlemen, I wish that all my clergy had a small grain of the same madness." In 1832 the bishop gave him faculties to absolve reserved sins throughout the diocese. Another of the astonishing circumstances of the Abbé Vianney's incumbency of Ars was its becoming a place of pilgrimage even during his lifetime. and that not to the shrine of his dear little St. Philomena, which he had set up, but to himself. No doubt curiosity had its share in starting it, for miracles of loaves and visits of the devil cannot be kept quiet, but it gathered strength and volume and continued because people wanted the spiritual direction of the village priest in his confessional. This steady stream of penitence, the pilgrimage, was what chiefly upset his myopic clerical critics. Some of them even forbade their people to go to him. People from afar began to consult him so early as 1827. From 1830 to 1845 the daily visitors averaged over 300. At Lyons a special booking office was opened for Ars, and 8-day return tickets issued. One could hardly hope to get a word with the curé in less. For him this meant not less than 11 or 12 hours every day in the confessional in winter, and anything up to 16 in summer, nor was he content with that. For the last 15 years of his life he gave a catechism instruction every day in the church at 11 o'clock. Simple discourses, unprepared, he had no chance to prepare them, which went to the hearts of the most learned and the most hardened. Rich and poor, learned and simple, good and bad, lay and cleric, bishops, priests, religious, all came to Ars, to kneel in the confessional and sit before the catechism stall. Monsieur Vianney did not give long instructions and directions to his penitents, a few words, a sentence even, but it had the authority of holiness and not infrequently was accompanied by supernatural knowledge of the penitent's life. How many times, for example, he was able to correct the number of years since a penitent had last been to confession, or remind him of a sin which he had forgotten. "Love your clergy very much," was all he said to me, said the Archbishop of Auch. "Love the good God very much," to the Superior General of a teaching institute. What a pity! What a pity! He would murmur at each accusation, and weep at the tale of sin, for this people came hundreds of miles and waited sometimes 12 hours on end, or had to attend in the church day after day, before they could be heard. By these simple means numberless conversions were made. At first the rigor with which the curé treated his own flock was extended to outsiders, but with advancing years came greater experience of the needs and capabilities of souls and deeper insight into moral theology, and pity, kindness, and tenderness modified his severity. He discouraged people from encumbering themselves with a multiplicity of little devotions. The Rosary, the Angelus, ejaculatory prayer, above all, the Church's liturgy, these he recommended. Private prayer, he would say, is like straw scattered here and there. If you set it on fire it makes a lot of little flames. But gather these straws into a bundle and light them, and you get a mighty fire, rising like a column into the sky. Public prayer is like that. There were no affected attitudes, no ohs and ahs, no sighs and transports about Monsieur Vianney. When most interiorly moved he simply smiled, or wept. Reference has been made to his power of reading souls, and his knowledge of the hidden past and of future events was no less remarkable than his more formal miracles. None of these things can be brought within the charge of uselessness, a sneer so easily and so thoughtlessly made at the marvels attributed to some of the saints, but the Abbé Vianney's prophecies did not relate to public affairs but to the lives of individuals and were directed to their personal help and consolation. On one occasion he made the interesting admission that hidden things seemed to come to him by way of memory. He told the Abbé Taquenir that, "I once said to a certain woman, 'So it is you who have left your husband in hospital and who refuse to join him.' 'How do you know that?' she asked. 'I've not mentioned it to a soul.' I was more surprised than she was. I imagined that she had already told me the whole story. The Baronne de Lacamble, a widow, was troubled by the determination of her 18-year-old son to marry a girl of 15. She determined to consult the curé of Ars, whom she had never met. When she went into the church it was crowded to the doors and she despaired of ever getting a word with him. Suddenly he came out of his confessional, went straight up to her and whispered, "Let them marry. They will be very happy." A servant girl was warned by him that a great peril awaited her in Lyons. A few days later the memory of this warning enabled her to escape from the hands of a notorious murderer of girls, at whose trial she subsequently gave evidence. To Monsignor Ullathorne, Bishop of Birmingham, he, in 1854, said with great conviction, "I believe that the Church in England will recover her former greatness." He stopped a strange girl in his church one day. "Is it you who have written to me, my child?" "Yes, Monsieur l'Abbé." "Very well. You must not worry. You will enter the convent all right. You will hear from the Reverend Mother in a few days." And it was so, nor had he communicated with the abbess concerned. Mlle Henry, a shopkeeper at Chalon-sur-Saône, came to ask Monsieur Vianney to pray for the cure of her sick aunt. He told her to go back home at once, for while you are here you are being imposed on. She returned accordingly and found her assistant making free with the stock, and the aunt recovered. The numerous miracles of bodily healing reported of the curé of Ars were mostly attributed by him to the intercession of Saint Philomena, and his first demand of those that sought them was fervor of faith, something of the faith by which he himself was enabled miraculously to provide money and goods when one or other of his charities was in straits. But the schoolmaster of Ars, echoing the well-known words about Saint Bernard, saw where was the greatest miracle of all. The most difficult, extraordinary and amazing work that the curé did was his own life. And every day after the noon Angelus, when he left the church to go to the presbytery to eat the food brought in from La Providence, there was a manifestation of recognition, love, and respect for his goodness. It sometimes took him over 20 minutes to cross that dozen yards. The sick in soul and body knelt to ask his blessing and his prayers. They seized his hands, they tore pieces from his cassock. It was one of hardest mortifications. What misguided devotion, he exclaimed at it. It is not surprising that as time went on Monsieur Vianney longed more and more for solitude and quiet. But there is more to it than that. Every one of his 41 years at Ars was spent there against his own will. All the time he had to fight his personal predilection for the life of a Carthusian or Cistercian. He left the village 3 times, ran away, in fact, and in 1843, after a grave illness, it needed the diplomacy of the bishop and of Monsieur de Guéretz to get him to return. In 1848, under rather delicate circumstances which have not failed to arouse comment and speculation, the Sisters of Saint Joseph from Bourg took over the direction and administration of La Providence, which was to be carried on just as Monsieur Vianney had planned it. However, only the school survived, the orphanage being reduced to only a few children when they took over. The sisters allowed it to lapse. In the following year more religious were introduced into the village, namely, teaching brothers of the Holy Family from Bely, to whom the curé entrusted the boys' school which he had established and run under lay masters for many years. Their superior, Brother Athanasius, conducted the school until 1890, and was one of the chief witnesses to the last 10 years of the curé's life. In 1852 Monsignor Chalandon, the new bishop of Bely, made Monsieur Vianney an honorary canon of the chapter. He was invested almost by force and never again put on his mozzetta, which indeed he sold for 50 francs which he required for same charitable purpose. 3 years later well-meaning but insensitive officials obtained for him further recognition in the form of a civil decoration. He was made a Knight of the Imperial Order of the Legion of Honor. But with this he positively refused to be invested, and no persuasion could induce him to have the imperial cross pinned to his cassock, even for a moment. What if, when death comes, I were to appear with these toys and God were to say to me, "Begone. You have had your reward"? I can't think why the emperor has sent it to me, he added, unless it is because I was once a deserter. In 1853, just when without his knowledge arrangements had been made to exchange his rather unsatisfactory curate for a more promising one, Monsieur Vianney made his last attempt at flight from Ars. It is a moving story, of the old and worn-out priest cajoled back to his presbytery on behalf of the numerous poor sinners who were unable to do without him. He imagined he was doing the will of God by going away, said Catherine Lassagne in innocent surprise. And it may well have been the will of God that his servant should now have some few years of repose and peace, to practice that contemplation which had already borne fruit in some of the highest experiences of ecstasy and vision. It is not impossible that the Bishop of Bely should be mistaken in not allowing him to resign his cure. But such a possibility was not one which Monsieur Vianney would entertain. He devoted himself to his ministry more assiduously than ever. In the year 1858, 59 over 1,000 pilgrims visited Ars. The curé was now a very old man of 73, and the strain was too much. On July 18 he knew the end was at hand, and on the 24th he lay down on his bed for the last time. "It is my poor end. You must send for Monsieur le Curé of Jassens," he said. Even now he sent for several souls to kneel by his deathbed and finish their confessions. As the news spread, people flocked into Ars from all sides. 20 priests accompanied the Abbé Beau when he brought the last sacraments from the church. "It is sad to receive Holy Communion for the last time," murmured the dying priest. On August 3 the Bishop of Bely arrived in haste, and at 2 o'clock in the morning of the 4th, amid a storm of thunder and lightning, the earthly life of the curé of Ars came to a gentle end. The cause of Saint John Mary Baptist Vianney was introduced at Rome in 1874. He was beatified by Pope Pius X in 1905 and canonized by Pius XI in 1925. The same pope made him principal patron saint of the parochial clergy throughout the world in 1929. Saint John Mary